Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the 286 Project, where we talk about art, culture, sports, politics, and anything else we can think of. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce my latest guest. She is a National Coordinator for Debating Matters. It is Dr. Mo Lovatt. Mo, how are you?
Hello, Chris. I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, you're welcome, you're welcome. Before we get started, I just explained who you were, you're National Coordinator for Debating Matters, but if you can just do another summary of basically what else you do and how did you come into creating Debating Matters?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I didn't create Debating Matters itself, but I've been a fan of the competition for a long time. So just so people know, it's a sixth form debating competition. Predominantly, we run it in schools. We also run it in other settings, prisons being something that we've been focusing on quite a lot this year. And what's different to kind of your usual debating competition, I suppose, is that we emphasize a couple of things. First of all, the argument should be content driven. So we really ask judges, and I'll explain about the judges in a moment, to judge the debaters on the content of their argument. So it's all very well being a fantastic speaker, but if you're just able to run rings around your opponent with sort of flourishes and sort of one-liners, but never really get to the heart of what the debate is about, then we don't think that's quite as good as somebody who's really done their research, thought about the issue from both sides and all the shades of grey that are in between on an issue, and are able to kind of defend their side of the argument with intelligence, reason, civility, and that's what we emphasize more than anything. The other thing we tend to do is our motions are contemporary issues. So they are issues that are being debated in society already. They're not often sort of ephemeral subjects, or they're things like, you know, should tech companies censor misinformation, or one that might interest you, you know, should we accept the risks inherent in contact sport? These are things that are really happening in society. So it's taken those ideas seriously and taken young people's contribution to that wider societal debate very seriously as well. So those are a few things that are a little bit different. The other thing is the panel of judges. Now we have a 3-person panel of judges who ask the students questions, and their job is to really push the students to find their best argument, you know, to put them on the spot a little bit, but to push and delve harder rather than to trip them up for the sake of them learning how to debate better. And the other thing we do is the judges always give really good feedback to the students on how they can improve. So it's aimed at the school side of things, is aimed at 16 to 18-year-olds. And it is about them engaging with ideas that matter and learning how to debate things that are important in society in a civil way, but also quite a robust way. So we can come on to talk about that. But I think that is something that is perhaps we underestimate young people and their ability to get to grips with really serious ideas, and not to shy away from them, or not to feel triggered by them, or, you know, not to see themselves as fragile, vulnerable people who can't actually get to grips with really serious matters. So that's kind of you know, I think which marks us out as we call ourselves the toughest debating competition in the world, you know, because it's about the debate, it's about the standard of the debate, and young people love it. That's the other thing. It's really good fun.
Obviously, I was going to ask you, how do young people take to it, especially in a world where we hear that there's certain things you can't say in class, or even the teachers might teach certain subjects and they call it indoctrination. So how do those 16 to 18-year-olds take it to debate? And do you have any students that go on to do well at like debating competitions at university if they choose to go there?
Yeah, they do actually, and we're hopefully going to be doing one at the Durham Union Society very, very soon. And what's lovely about that is they'll get an opportunity to go and see a bit of university life. And it is, you know, a lot of the alumni of the competition will write to us and say we put debating matters that we'd won, or that we were runners up, or whatever on our CV or for our application to university, and it's really stood us in good stead. So I mean, you do get students who enjoy debate joining debating matters. That's sort of self-evident. But you also get students who don't quite think that they can do it, and then they get up there on the stage, on the platform or whatever, and really surprise themselves. So and you know, that instills an awful lot of confidence in them. For we get a lot of kind of feedback of that ilk, you know, that you've really kind of inspired us to have confidence in our own ability to debate and to understand ideas better, and that we get an awful lot of that as well. And so I think and to me, that's what the confidence is about, isn't it? It's about pushing yourself to do something you perhaps don't think you can do, and then you find out you can do it, rather than shying away from things outside your comfort zone. And you know, you were asking me there about, you know, how do students find it? I think we are, in a sense, not the only people, but we are one of, you know, the organizations that are pushing back on this idea that young people's well-being will be affected if you know, if they hear ideas they don't like. We push back against that, and I have to say, you know, students agree with us. You know, they come back time and time again and say it was really good. We didn't feel patronized. Nobody gave us a pat on the back just for trying. They gave us a pat on the back because we'd done a very good job, and that's that. You know, nobody wants to just feel kind of patronized and, you know, prizes for everybody who took part. Nobody really sort of values that. But to actually put yourself out there, come up with something outside your comfort zone and feel really proud of yourself at the end of the day, that's an important part of character building as young people transition into adulthood. And I just wish there was more societies like us doing that sort of thing, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. But and you talked about the content, actually winning debates based on content, not just sound bites. But isn't there an argument to say that actually could be a combination of both, in the sense of, yes, you have to have good content, good research, but you don't want to get to a stage where you just send people to sleep, even if all your information is correct?
Yeah, no, that's right. And actually, sometimes what will happen, you'll get a student, because there are often A-level students who are really interested in statistics, and they've been told time and time again that they need to provide evidence, and that evidence is often presented in quite a technocratic, dry way with, did you know 14% of the public when surveyed felt, you know, over and over. And that's incredible. You know, that's quite often a bit of feedback judges will give. You don't want to just be talking about stats, and you don't just want to be kind of quoting objective research. Well, hardly any research is objective, but you know what I mean. So you do need a little bit of flourish in your style and all the rest of it. And I think, but knowing your facts enables you to take it onto that stage, because I think probably the least successful way of debating is when students have perhaps cottoned onto one strong idea in favor of their side of the motion, and they just keep saying it in different ways, you know, with lots of aplomb, but not actually kind of really understanding what it is they're talking about. So yes, you need a combination of the two, absolutely. But I think being secure in what you're arguing then allows you to kind of play with that a little bit, and it just comes naturally. Once you know your side of the debate and the other side of the debate inside out, then you can play around with that and have some fun with it, definitely.
Okay, cool. With debates, I always hear the term in good faith, i.e. now that, to my understanding, is regardless of agreements, that you come in there to actually discuss whatever motion it is and not try and trick each other. Is that what in good faith is to you? And is it an important element with regards to debating?
Yeah, I mean, partly, I think in good faith means that you are taking somebody, you're not saying that they're being contrarian for the sake of it, or you're not then, you know, the sort of internet trolls who don't really take people seriously, but they you know, they accuse them of putting up a false argument or gaslighting or all of these phrases. And so when you come to a debate, I mean, for me, the important thing about debate is that you're trying to get to the heart of an issue, the truth of an issue, or at least what you hold to be true about a particular issue. And that's, for me, one of the most important things about debate, is that it's almost like, it's not just an individual endeavor, it's quite a collective endeavor. If you and I are having a discussion about buffer zones around abortion clinics or whatever, I have to take you in good faith in that you mean what you're saying, and that you hold it to be true. And then you also have to respect my views. So it's a little bit about tolerance. And then, you know, we talk about, but have you found have you thought about it this way? And then that's the good faith bit, I think, is that you're coming together in good faith because you want to reach some kind of mutual understanding. You don't have to agree, but you have to understand that that we come to this in good faith, not that we're just trying to kind of get one over on each other for the sake of it, that there's something mutual about that conversation that we're having.
Okay, so in this very divisive world, which has been very divisive over the last decade or so, trying to get people together to a debate can be very difficult. So 2 parts really. 1, how do you get people to actually debate in the first place? And 2, almost going back to the good faith argument, how can you get them to at least agree to, well, almost agree to disagree in a respectful way? Because some of the debates I see on TV and whatnot, they just tend to be point scoring and people shouting all over each other. So how can that be prevented?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the word debate itself, it's worth digging down into what we mean by that, because we can have a debate and a discussion as a society. That's not quite the same as the kind of formal debate that we would do with 16 to 18-year-olds. We wouldn't do debating matters with probably with older young people, because it's very much, it's the format is there almost to teach you how to debate. So for instance, with our sixth form competitions, the students are given the side of the motion, for or against. They don't get to choose. They don't get to choose the topic either. We choose it for them. Now that is that gives you a little bit of discipline in that you are arguing, say, you know, we've got a new topic guide at the moment that says that billionaires owning social media is a threat to democracy. Okay, now a young person might already have thought about this, especially with Elon Musk taking over Twitter and what have you. They've probably got some preconceived ideas about what they think, and they might end up with a side of the motion that they don't agree with. But in a sense, that doesn't matter, because you're learning the for and against, because you can't debate unless you do learn what you're up against, sort of thing. But also it does sort of give the students a bit of a, because it's a format, it's a kind of trusted format. So you actually avoid that you think this, because you don't know what they actually think, because they're debating. It's a process, it's a kind of formal process of getting to understand the issue, rather than saying, you know, this is the hill I'm going to die on as as student A. So there's that, and I think it does. I mean, we don't mind if the debates get a little bit heated, you know, if people get a little bit passionate about them. In fact, I don't, when you're talking about things that matter to you, a bit of passion's really good, isn't it? But I think it is the antidote to social media debates, which are almost fruitless at times, or can be, or they can descend into echo chambers. And like you say, the debates on TV, I mean, that's something that I just think, what a shame what we're doing to the quality of debate in our society by turning it into some kind of gladiatorial free-for-all. And that's when you get these professional people who don't argue in good faith. So I won't say who, but I had a debate on Sky News with another pundit who wasn't arguing in good faith, because what he was doing, he was twisting he was very clever about it, but he was twisting my words and throwing things back at me to the point I ended up in a corner. And that's what I mean, that's bad faith, because you're not actually trying to allow the other person to speak and to understand what the issue is. You're just trying to wrap them up in knots and win political points. Yeah, I do worry about the state of TV debates, but I think also a lot of people feel that way. You know, I'm not alone in worrying about the quality of societal debate, and also I think some of the media companies are probably cottoning on to that. Yeah. Depends which program you're watching, I guess.
Yeah, indeed. And it's interesting you talk about TV debates, obviously with those, especially involving politicians. If you're a person watching a TV debate, is there an issue in terms of whether you trust what you're hearing is actually good, robust debate, and actually the truth? So, for example, these TV debates involving politicians, for instance, they're going to be scoring certain political points. Can that turn people off? And does it depend on the quality debate, depend on the actual person or the type of person doing a debate, be it a politician or a lecturer or etc.?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's a couple of places where you might look at why that format is at fault. First of all, politicians have become incredibly technocratic. I think we all know that, and probably since sort of the late 90s, that idea that, you know, they must be sleek, polished, they must come out with the party line, you know, spin doctors, all the rest of it. Here's the party line, don't veer from that. So there's a bit of genuineness there. Also, I think, again, this kind of tripping people up. So there's nothing that, you know, some of the press like more than to try and trip a politician up and get them to misspeak. And then they you know, they have to issue a formal apology, or they might say, no, I didn't mean it, like, you know, I sort of misspoke in the heat of the moment, and then but what I actually meant was, and then people don't take that in good faith. They just say, oh yeah. So we're all a little bit to blame. That, you know, you need to kind of, if somebody misspeaks, I'm trying to think of an example. I can't really think of one, but if a politician misspeaks and it's clear that they're misspeaking, then I think you have to give the benefit of the doubt, rather than just saying, oh, that's the party I don't want in power, so I'm going to give them a hard time on social media. That's where the tribalism comes in, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. And sticking on a theme with TV debates, I remember reading an article, I can't remember who it was from, but a few months ago, and he was briefly talking about the presidential debate in 1960 between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. And one of the things from that article it talks about is people are asked afterwards, the debates, who did you think won the debate? And what was interesting is those who watched the debate on TV thought that JFK won the debate, whereas those who heard the debate on radio actually thought Richard Nixon won the debate. So does a medium by which you transmit a debate make a difference in regards to whether you thought who won that debate or not?
Oh, that's a good question. And you can sort of imagine that JFK is probably a little bit more got a face for TV, hasn't he, than Richard Nixon or had. So you can see why that might have been the case. I mean, I suppose that's a level of superficiality that we all probably need to guard against. Who's the most photogenic debater, rather than what they're actually saying. But I was thinking about a more contemporary example. So when I was making my mind up as to which way to vote, as to whether or not we should leave the European Union or not, I went back to some of the debates that had been had when we first joined, you know, in 1972, 73, and between Tony Benn, who was arguing that we shouldn't join, and I think, was it Ted Heath that was saying we should join? Anyway, that debate, the quality of the argument there was so interesting in terms of, you know, the pros and cons of joining, as it was the EEC at the time, compared to some of the terrible debates and the coverage of the debates. Now, I went to some pretty good live debates, actually, with various academics and politicians and speakers, and they were pretty good quality. They were good quality, in fact. But some of the stuff on TV was just not. It was, you know, this that idea that what makes good TV isn't necessarily getting to kind of the heart of something with integrity. I suppose there's a disjoint there that we're all aware of, and it's quite hard to fix, because a lot of people like that sort of combative style of, you know, my politicians managed to talk over your politician kind of thing. I don't personally like it. I think a lot of people don't. But, you know, the ratings come in, so some people must like it, you know.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And it's interesting, I was just thinking as you were talking there, going back to the distortion of debate, I remember when I was seeing debates for general elections or the TV debates, and what I found interesting, because I sometimes watch them on TV and then look on Twitter and Facebook, see what people say, and they can become very distorted, especially if you're pro-Labour or pro-Conservative in terms of what people say, and you get that in the newspapers as well. Is that a danger with debates currently, that depending on how they're analysed, they can distort actually who won, if anyone did win, if it was a draw?
Yeah, absolutely. And also that tendency that TV shows have got now to just clip a tiny part of what a contributor said, then frame it with their own understanding of what the person said. And then that clip goes viral, but you don't get the nuance and the context of the wider discussion. I think the only answer to that, though, is more debate and to get better at it. And that's why I wrote my letter on liberty, in a sense that ideas have been debated since the ancient Greeks, and probably a lot longer than that. But the issues and the context in which those issues present themselves changes all the time. And so we need to constantly renew ourselves with what ideas are and what the consequences of certain actions will be. We need to constantly do that. So so I worry that, yes, it can be off-putting, especially for younger people who are perhaps interested in making the world a better place, because I think that's why most young people get involved in politics, or why they want to understand the world around them, is because they want to make the world a better place. So I'm worried it's a bit off-putting, but I think the answer is not to sanitize debate too much, not to make it too safe, because then it's not real, it's not sanitized, it's not raw, but also to find better ways of having debates. And that was particularly true in lockdown, when we were actually shut away from each other and we couldn't actually, there's nothing better than a live debate in a room with people. And you're more courteous as well, because you see people as a human being rather than just an avatar. So that helps as well.
Yeah, indeed. And also, again, the whole free speech argument, and imagine debates is part of that as well. Would you say that debate is a cornerstone of free speech, in that it's one of the ways in which not just we use our free speech, but use our speech as a way to think, as opposed to something like reading, which is more manual?
Yeah, I do. First of all, as I was saying earlier, it's a communal act. You know, you can't debate on your own. I mean, you can, but you know, you're not going to get much sense out of it. I don't always know what I think about an issue until I've had it, and until I've heard what I think out loud. That's the thing, just speaking the words out loud, and then listening to what other people think of that idea. And one of the things I used to find when I was young was I would be debating an issue, and somebody say, hang on, you didn't say that earlier, you changed your mind. And I'm saying, yes, I have changed my mind as a result of this conversation. It's not a kind of, you don't have to do a gotcha on me. I'm evolving what I think as part of this conversation. So I really like that. I've never minded talking and saying something that I'm later going to disagree with, because I think that's part of my evolution and my understanding what I think about the world, my kind of moral autonomy, really. I think that's something that's really important. If you just receive opinions, or what you think might be the right opinion, you know, how are you really sure that that's what you think? And could you hold that argument that you hold in all circumstances and, you know, in context? So I'm a big believer that that's what debating is. It's fundamental to democracy, because the challenges we face as a society are constantly changing, and how we deal with certain issues. I might have changed my mind on a whole number of things as I get older, but it also might not be just about my age or my personal development. It might be because certain things have changed, you know. Like I'll give you an example. So I was very much, as a young person, against Western military intervention in other countries' affairs, and I still pretty much am like that. But Ukraine is an example where I think actually I want to offer my solidarity, and I think when you see another country fighting for their own sovereignty, then you want to get behind that and you want to offer them support. And that's tricky, because you know, you don't want to end up with a country becoming a client state of the United States or whatever. So the answers aren't always clear, hard and fast. And so constantly listening to what other people have to say, but also talking to your peers about what you might think raises all sorts of issues, and it might make you change your mind. And that is important, because you know, in a democracy, we are, I suppose, we're all morally equal. That's the idea behind democracy, isn't it? That we all have kind of moral equality, and that we all have a contribution to make, and that we all, you know, should have a say in how our country is run. And if you are just persuaded by, you know, whatever received opinion you get, then that's not really you kind of being sure what you think. It's not testing your ideas. It's not kind of opening them up to contestation with others. So for that reason, I think debate is sort of almost like a bedrock of democracy, definitely.
You talk a lot about changing your mind, and also you've talked about gut years as well. Maybe it's just me, but do you feel that we don't allow people to change their minds that as often as we should? In that once they make an opinion, if they don't change their minds, it's almost like, gut you, see, you were wrong.
Yeah, I do. That's one of my bugbears. It's like, what if I have changed my mind? I've just talked about Ukraine. I might sort of change my mind again, but in 6 months about that, somebody could pick a clip and said, you didn't say that, I think I suppose one of the things that I thought as well around the EU referendum was that we had this discussion and debate, and then we put it to a vote, and that provided the government with a mandate. And I think you do at some point have to come to a decision on things, and you have to kind of, especially if it's a mandate, you have to kind of abide by it. But that idea that, laughing at people who might have regrets for voting for Brexit, why? They've changed their mind. You know that they're perfectly entitled to do that. And what you're not entitled to do is start messing around with mandates. So yeah, I do. I think that again, it's that gotcha thing. What do they say on social media? They say, "Is this you?" And then they give people a clip of something they said 10 years ago or something. That's not arguing in good faith, is it? Because that's somebody who's reached a different conclusion or evolved their thinking in some way.
Yeah, there was one, to give you an example, there was one prominent person on Twitter who talked about, someone mentioned to him about the first lockdown and how he done a tweet saying he agreed with it, and now he doesn't agree with it, and he's like, I got ya. And I thought, that's just immature. It's like 3 years ago, we have more information now. I just think it's crazy that you're not allowed to actually change your mind on certain things, and that is almost hung as an anchor for the rest of your life.
It is, and I think you really do need to guard against that. I also do think there's a thing that people get very angry about lockdown as well, don't they? They because it had real world consequences. That genuinely people died because of lockdown, and we've all got all sorts of problems because of the backlog in the NHS and all the rest of it. And so I think the reason people get angry with that particular presenter is that he was very vociferously saying, to other people that this was the right thing to do when all of us had, lots of information. And I think that might be an example of him being a bit contrarian and not listening to other sides as well. So I agree with you on the gotcha thing, but also you'll get that thing where all of those people that really, really forced lockdown down everybody's throats will suddenly see the seas changing, and the WhatsApp leaks have probably kind of added to that. There's been a bit of a sea change, and then they suddenly jump to the other side, so it's never straightforward, is it? You could argue that's just a bit going with the flow to be popular.
Yeah, indeed. Are there any subjects which shouldn't be debated? So as an example, as weird as it is, like flat earthers, and if you do debate them, do they give them a legitimacy that they don't deserve?
I don't think so. I don't think there are debates that are off limits. I mean, I would say age appropriate, obviously. So, you wouldn't want to have, I think one of the things we have forgotten to do is differentiate between children and adults in our society. At one hand, we ask children to be very grown up about certain things, and at other times we completely infantilize adults. So I think that is a kind of contemporary trend that we're wrestling with. But I think the flat earthers is a good example. And obviously we had quite a lot of conspiracy theories around COVID and the lockdown and all of that sort of thing. And I think what led to those conspiracy theories being really embedded is that they weren't allowed to be debated. They weren't, I remember thinking at the time, if my friend who'd gone completely down the rabbit hole of conspiracy and a whole bunch of us had been down the pub having a pint and discussing it, that would not have allowed some sort of rather weird ideas to become embedded. But because censorship makes people think they're being shut down for a reason, then that kind of adds to that feeling that that there is some kind of conspiracy. There's a conspiracy of silence, and so I always think that sunshine is the best disinfectant in that sense, that shed light on an issue, and you're never going to stop some people believing the earth is flat. And so what, I guess. I remember trying to have one debate at university with somebody who was arguing something that I just did sound conspiratorial, and it just kept going round and round in circles. And at that point you think, is there any point having this debate? If this person wants to hold on to this slightly irrational idea, well, maybe that's up to them, sort of thing. Yeah, I still probably would try, because I always think debate's really worth having. But you know, if somebody say I'm not religious, I don't believe in God, and I have a discussion with somebody who fundamentally believes in God, it's probably not going to change. We're probably, neither of us are going to change our fundamental belief on that one issue, but we also might be able to tolerate each other's views on the issue. And that's what tolerance means. It means accepting that we hold different views. And that's when you start having majority voting, and that's how you come to a decision as a society, even if people might slightly disagree.
Is there enough tolerance in society these days? And what I mean by that is, before, tolerance wasn't necessarily saying you agreed with something, but doing it yourself. We said, okay, if you want to do it, that's fine. Do people go into debates with the tolerance that they're used to, or is that just something I'm seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I find, particularly with debating matters, I suppose, yes, they do, because that's why they're there. They know that that's kind of the reason that they're having the debate they're having. But no, you're right. This idea that that we can hold different views and still like each other as human beings is really really been challenged, I think. If I think back to when I was at university, sort of in the late 90s, I went as a mature student. So if you're working out the maths and the wrinkles there, I went as a mature student, and, you know, you could have some really good meaty debates with people, get quite heated, really disagree with each other, and then go into dinner at the, you know, in the cafe and just be friends again. That's harder now. You see it all the time on dating apps. You know, people won't date a Tory, or, you know, people have to kind of what was the one about academics would be very uncomfortable having dinner with a Brexiteer. That was one that I think Matt Goodwin came out with recently. I think that's really a shame. I mean, there are some people, if somebody had if somebody was an obnoxious racist, I would definitely move tables, or probably, you know, challenge them, and then move tables, you know, and then that's fine. But I think what we're talking about is, can we live together even though we hold different views, and can we tolerate the fact that there's viewpoint diversity in our society, and that's the way it should be. And that's harder. I think that's definitely harder, and that is a symptom of the culture wars. I think moral certainties are shifting a lot at the moment. I'm not somebody who thinks that social media is to blame particularly. I don't think it helps at times, but then it has lots of good things about it as well. I think it's more that we're in a sort of phase of society where there is lots of moral uncertainty, and a lot of old-fashioned, or not even old-fashioned, but older ideas, 20th century ideas, are kind of up for grabs again. So in that sense, I think it makes debate a bit more fraught. And if you, like me, believe in it and believe that we should be able to tolerate viewpoint diversity, then you have to just hold on to that. But it can sometimes be very hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I talk about, and I've actually almost had a complaint about myself with regards to how the last 10 years have been with regards to free speech, in that we talk about it a lot and we debate it a lot, but I'm someone who likes action. I like ideas put into action. Has that been is that sometimes a problem with debate, especially now where people debate some subjects so many times, but actually you get to a point where nothing's actually happening, you go around in circles, and you actually need to implement some action at the end of it?
Yeah, I think that's what I meant sort of about referendums and government mandates and votes in general. Yes, you're not just debating for the sake of it. I mean, you can, and debating for the sake of it can be very enjoyable, and there are just people who just enjoy rhetoric and debate for in and of its own self. But quite often it is because you're trying to reach a decision or understand what you think in order to either vote for somebody or to implement changes yourself. And I think we are at that stage where people are a bit more disenfranchised from society. You know, you always hear about the Westminster bubble and that, you know, the parties don't represent them. You know, people call themselves politically homeless a lot now. So the debate becomes important for that reason, so that you are really trying to, we're kind of almost reshaping society, aren't we? I mean, the Labour Party is nothing like the Labour Party I grew up with, and neither is the Conservative Party. And the Conservative Party are having somewhat of a identity crisis, I think, at the moment as well. So it's almost like an organic process in a sense, that the shifting sands and the public conversations that we're having are leading to a kind of realignment of what people think and the best way for society. So you don't necessarily have to be a politician to change the world. In fact, probably some of the people who change the world for the best aren't politicians. But you have to sort of be in the discussion in order to shape the direction of society, I guess.
Yeah, indeed. And I know you kind of answered this in some of the last answers you've given, but in regards to debates, what are the biggest changes that have happened to debates? Not just in the last 10 years, I just mean in general, because obviously one of them would be the media, the medium by which a debate is broadcast or displayed. But other main changes have you seen, or have you even researched, that have happened to debates over the decades?
Massive changes. So I'm not going to argue that, because I don't agree with that. That can happen a bit in schools, because they think they will be, that what they're debating is morally attached to them as a human being, rather than seeing it as a format for letting ideas flourish. So, but in wider society, definitely the increase in ad hominem attacks. Thinking that if you disagree with me on this issue, you must be a bad person. The other thing that worries me a lot is this idea that people must have the right opinion, not the true opinion, or that they must just sort of virtue signal on a particular issue without having given it much thought, because it makes them look like a good person. Rather than that's a big change as well. The other thing is no debate. An awful lot of people now say there's no debate on this, and I would not like to be blessed with that kind of moral certitude that I knew the answer to everything. I think it's incredibly arrogant to think that there could be no debate on something because you know all the answers. And the other thing as well, which is so different, is this idea that ideas are harmful. So in a university context particularly, I know I said I went to university as a mature student, and that was partly because, I don't know, as a working class kid, I felt like I'd missed out on the ability to kind of be amongst brilliant people, brilliant thinkers, you know, contemporaries, lecturers, read fantastic books, visit brilliant libraries, and be part of that long historical tradition of thought. I really wanted that. I wanted to go to university and read people I disagreed with, people I agreed with, people that I didn't know what they meant until I had to reread it and discuss it, and sit on the quad in summer days, sipping Pimm's and talk about Locke and Kant, and I wanted all of that. That's why I went to university, to kind of be, to learn to be an intellectual, I guess, or to kind of be exposed to intellectual ideas. Whereas now you will get this idea that certain ideas are harmful, that they're detrimental to your well-being, that you're not safe. That some ideas can make you feel unsafe. And that's problematic, partly because it is engendering this idea that young people, and we're talking about university students here, they're not children anymore, can be negatively affected by an idea they don't like, or an idea they haven't come across before. That's infantilizing. That is censorship by quite an egregious method. And how on earth do we grow as a society if we just say you can't say that, or this idea is not up for debate? You just can't. You become stagnant. J.S. Mill said, an idea not worth an idea that isn't debated just becomes dead dogma. So at that point, it's not an idea, it's just a received opinion.
Yeah, and I see a lot these days of certain ideas, almost like dogma, people repeating them like a market trader's pattern. It's crazy, and you just think, wow. And these are not just, I'm not just talking about people who haven't been to university, who fell out of school young. You see a lot in university, people who left university, where you think the power of debate should be enhanced, and yet all of a sudden, when you hear them, you think, hang on, you're just making these opinions that and dogmas that basically everyone else is coming up with.
That's right. And I think, you know, what I'll hear a lot of young people say is, I couldn't say that at university. You know, I couldn't. I think Conservatives get that quite a lot. Young Conservatives kind of keep their voting behaviour to themselves. But also, you know, if you want to challenge the idea that trans women are same as biological women, then you would lose your friends instantly. That can be very problematic for a lot of young people, because we've allowed that to be equated with transphobia, which it's not equated. You know, you can be accepting and respectful and empathetic and, you know, friends with most of us have got a trans friend, haven't we? But that's not the same as saying that, you know, a biological woman is a diluted concept that can apply to somebody who isn't a biological woman. It's a different type of argument. But for young people, that's a real debate in universities that they're too frightened to have. And that's, you know, going back to kind of people going into conspiracy theories and far-flung parts of the web, and imagine a young person that finds themselves out of kilter with the kind of moral minority quite often, and you know, where do they go for their ideas if they're, you know, they can end up in all sorts of strange places on the internet, you know, just trying to find somebody who agrees with them. So that's why you know, I think these trends are incredibly regressive. The no platforming and the cancel culture and the you can't say that thing, they're incredibly regressive. They're anti-enlightenment. They're, you know, they are pushing us into some kind of dogma, not religious dogma, but some kind of dogma where you can only say the high status opinion. I think that's a lovely phrase. I can't remember who I picked that up, but you know what we mean by it, don't you? That there are certain opinions that if you want to show that you're high status, you have certain, you vote a certain way, you have certain opinions and all the rest of it. And it's incredibly stagnant, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talked earlier about speaking like the truth in debates. And one of the phrases which I hate now is my truth, as though the truth is subjective. And there's little terms like that, I imagine, have changed in nature of debates and how people not just perceive them, but participate in them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to use a contemporary example, you know, the Gary Lineker, where he was suspended from Match of the Day because he'd said that Suella Braverman's language was akin to 1930s Germany. And what was interesting about that debate is, first of all, Suella, I don't agree with Suella Braverman on immigration, by the way, but that's not really the point. The point was that there is no equivalence between the Tories' current immigration strategy and exterminating 6 million Jews in death camps, right? There is no equivalence between those two things at all. But actually what the debate focused on was the words. So it wasn't that Gary Lineker had said you're doing exactly the same. He was talking about the language that people were using, and this idea that that the language is the thing that's problematic. Actually, what was problematic about Nazi Germany was killing people. Okay, that, you know, that not just, I mean, the language was horrible, but you know, that wasn't the point. The point was so the focus really became on the language that Suella Braverman had used rather than the policy itself. And I think that is, gosh, I heard some young person say, it's just part of the postmodern condition. And it is a little bit weird, you know, it's lovely to hear an 18-year-old use that. phrase. But it is a bit like that. We have become a little bit obsessed with the language that we use and policing the language that people use rather than the concepts behind the language, and that makes people frightened to use language in case they get cancelled for having misspoken. We kind of go back to where we were before, but that's a massive. And if you start to make the idea that words are harmful and that they can be detrimental to your well-being, then you start to draw an equivalence between action and words, and we saw that a lot around the 6th of January. You know, that people were not differentiating between. No, it was. I'm trying to think. That's not the example I'm thinking. It's an example around that time where people thought some of the words we used were as bad as punching somebody, you know, or actually physical violence. So that's another thing that's been conflated in our postmodern condition, is that, you know, on the one hand, silence is violence. On the other hand, words are harmful. So it's got a real fixation about language and words, our current epoch, rather than the ideas that underpin those words.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the Gary Lineker tweet, one of the things I got from it was people's views on free speech at that point. And I'm just wondering, when it comes to free speech and debate, are people very hypocritical about it? Because I believe, yes, they'll talk about the principle of free speech, but actually, so when you look at what they say regarding certain subjects, actually, you shouldn't say this or you should say that, etc.
Yeah, no, you've hit a really good thing about the Gary Lineker thing. All of a sudden, all these free speech warriors came out. They'd never believed in free speech before, but just when they agreed with Lineker, they became, you know, a new kind of free speech warrior. It was a little bit disingenuous, I think, because believing in free speech means that you defend everybody's right to say what they want to say, whether you agree with them or not. It's very easy to defend somebody you agree with. That's not really free speech. The hard thing about free speech is defending somebody's right to say it when you don't agree with them. That's the important thing about free speech. But I was going to say something else that sort of lost my track a little bit. But oh yes, I know what I was going to say. So what you'll find is, you know, the term snowflake or the social justice warriors, it's all quite often attached to the left, and it's the left that's silencing and censoring debates. But then suddenly, when something triggers people who are on the right of politics, they can get equally as kind of censorious about what can be debated and the language that people can use. They can be quite snowflakery themselves as well. And one of the things at my age I've noticed is that who's defending free speech has shifted. When I was a student, lefties were defending free speech. Now it's much more people on the right that defend free speech. But it should be regardless of your own personal opinion. And actually sometimes that the right defense of free speech can sometimes taper off when suddenly their own viewpoint gets challenged. So
interesting you made there about the left and they're not defending free speech now, but then you mentioned that times the right doesn't as well. I'm seeing stuff in the right that, in terms of free speech, not other things, but we'll stick to free speech, that they're starting to do that the left, they criticise left for many, many years. Are you starting to see that, or is it just my imagination?
No, definitely. I think it is. I mean, you know, I would say left and right are far less meaningful now than they were. I do think we are having some kind of political realignment. We are working out what the challenges of our economic and social system has for us, and we are all sort of realigning. So I think those terms can be a little bit less helpful than they once were, but we use them because they're quite convenient. But certainly when I was at university, it was definitely the left that were defending free speech. And historically, it's been the case that minorities and people without power, people who didn't have social and economic power, economic capital, were the ones who benefited most from free speech. They benefited from the ability to have their point of view heard and to not be censored. And I think that's pretty much the same now. When I refer to those with high status opinions, it is, I know it's a bit of a trigger word, but it is the elites, it is the cultural elites, it is the people that are morally assured that they're running society and there's nothing to be debated, that are the most censorious. And I just think we've probably shifted to a way where culturally, in our media landscape, in our cultural landscape, in our university educational landscape, it is people with much more left-wing ideas that are in control, and they've proved themselves to be quite easy to turn their back on some of their liberal tenets because they don't need them anymore. It's always been the way, isn't it? The powerful don't need free speech as much. They don't need liberal values as much because they're all right, Jack, sort of thing.
So is there an issue in regards to that, in regards to the platforms of debate, in the sense of, if you're someone who's working class and as well as got a coherent argument, it's much harder for you, or even someone who historically is a minority or a woman, who it might be much harder for you to get a bigger platform to debate, because you, for want of a better term, are almost at the bottom of the rung of the ladder, where someone who's, say, middle class, been to university, has more chance of being heard and getting on TV and getting a big platform to get their voice across.
Yeah, but life's unfair.
Yeah.
You just have to work a bit harder at it. If you're working class or you're from a minority background, or and I think that the thing about that might be that you don't have the avenues, you don't have maybe the cultural or social capital to find your way into these debates and stuff. And that's why I love doing Debate Matters, because you are getting kids of all backgrounds and all educational attainment levels learning to love debate. So I think you got to keep pushing at it, but I'm not for this idea of equity, that because life's unfair you have to give certain people a bump up, because that starts to treat us as morally unequivalent as human beings. Yeah, okay, you're working class, okay, you're from a disenfranchised community, whatever, you just got to work a bit harder. And actually, sometimes I think working class people are, I might be overgeneralizing here, but so tell me off if you think I'm wrong, but are more open to debate. They are more sort of confident to have a good old Barney and get it wrong, and they're not so frightened of being seen to say the right thing as people who got some status to lose, I guess. So I always used to find that when I worked in the arts, the artists were always talking about going into working class communities to teach young working class self-confidence and resilience. And I used to think working class kids have got loads of self-confidence and resilience. It's turning that, it's like you say, it's finding the avenues to kind of be fully part of society. That's the tricky bit.
Yeah, and we've talked about free speech just in terms of obviously the verbal side of it, and also debate. One other form of free speech I would say is actually protesting. What are your thoughts in regards to how protest has developed, and are you starting to see a constriction of protest? Because that's one is legitimate form that everyone can get involved in.
Yeah, I know, I'm 100% behind the right to protest as well, and that's one of those examples where quite often I think people on the right they don't like the issue that the protest's about, so they want to shut it down. And so I still think we need the right to protest 100%. And the other thing that's happened, I mean, protests. This happened over Black Lives Matter, and it happens over some of the Extinction Rebellion stuff, where people point to a certain point where the protests might have got a bit edgy or actually descended into violence. That happens in all sorts of protests throughout history. It just does. It's the risk you take if you're going to go out and campaign on something that's a contentious issue or protest about something. That does happen. I don't like this this sort of what I call this nihilistic form of protest, where people are gluing themselves to works of art and sort of, because protests have to be disruptive, that's true, but there's something about the form of protest today which is a little bit nihilistic, in that it doesn't seem to be about creating a better society or kind of making your argument to the whole of humanity, it almost seems a little bit anti-human. Some of the Extinction Rebellion protests say, you know, why would you destroy a work of art that brings joy and beauty to, you know, generations down the ages, and everybody who can go to a gallery and see that? There's something quite mean-spirited about that. It's not about your protest, it's about look at me. And so I suppose if I was going to be critical of some of the protest movements today, they do seem a little bit me-ish. It's a bit, look at me, I'm a good person, I'm gluing myself to the pavement and I'm going to feel good about myself, rather than an actual genuine desire to push for some kind of societal change that would be better.
Yeah, indeed. So not long left interview, and you've kind of alluded to this in my next question, but what makes a good debater? What fundamental skills do you need? I know you've talked about research and obviously being a good talker. What other skills do you need?
An ability to listen.
Yeah.
So to be able to listen to the other side. Some of the best school debates that I've been in is at the end, where the students have to give their final thoughts on a particular issue. And what they've done is they've incorporated some of the best points from the other side, best points from some of the audience questions, and they've wrapped them up into a kind of final boom to make their point. So listening is really important. And an ability to adapt and be flexible in your thinking. Just dogmatically saying the same thing over and over again, I don't think makes for a good debate. And it is about arguing in good faith. It's like, we're here because we care about this issue. I don't want to destroy you as a person because I disagree with your point of view. I want us to be able to reach some kind of understanding where I change your mind, or I move you a little bit to my way of thinking, or I moved a little bit to your way of thinking. And then the best debates for me are where you come away and you can't stop thinking about them because it's not ended. You know, debate is a kind of continuous process, and it's not ended with a winner and a loser as such, but we're all winners because we've all thought about the issue a bit more and we'll continue to do so.
Okay, so obviously we talked about debates have changed over the last few years. Is there anything you'd like to see incorporated in debates now that you think would make them more robust and more, not just such relevant, but more widely known in society?
I'd love to debate to be much more a part of the fabric of our culture, that we see it as a good thing. I remember a few years ago, actually, it was when I just joined Twitter, somebody saying, oh, I'm very suspicious of people who want to debate. I'm very suspicious. And I thought, why would you be suspicious of people who want to debate? But I think people are frightened that that people who want to debate are going to manipulate people into thinking their way. So that comes again with that kind of moral autonomy and that idea that people don't have minds of their own to reject bad ideas and to accept good ideas. And so that's all sort of tied up in that, isn't it? If you're suspicious of being able to debate an idea, then you're not very firm in your own beliefs, are you, if that's the case? So I would like to see it much more. Some of the things we do at the Academy of Ideas, we have salons, which the Liverpool salon, you spoke at the Birmingham salon recently, I think, Chris, and those are based on the old 18th century salons where people would read a pamphlet and go and debate it, in the taverns and town hall debates. Those are brilliant. The West Wing, when I was a big fan of the West Wing and they would have town hall debates, I thought, gosh, we could do with more of those here. And we have the great Battle of Ideas every October as well, where we have 200 debates and thousands of speakers, and it's a real an atmosphere. You come for the weekend. One thing I always think, no, it's a shame when people do this. I understand why they do, is they just come, speak and leave. Rather than kind of just hanging around for a drink at the end, or buying a sandwich and having a chat and just being imbibed in that kind of atmosphere where we're free thinking, open debating, and ultimately I think making ourselves and society a better place.
Yeah. And hopefully I'm going to be there this October as well. It'll be my third one in a row. So I'll be really looking forward to it.
Be nice to see you.
Yeah, I agree with you about Battle of Ideas. It's such a wonderful. I've been wanting to go for years, and I managed to do a couple of years ago. It's such a wonderful event, and one of the things I like about it, it's one of the few events that is debates based. Yes, I go to salons here, and they're wonderful, but of that size,
Yeah.
I don't think you can beat it.
I don't think you can. I've been going for years before I even worked for the Academy of Ideas. I don't know that there's any festival of ideas that quite beats it, really, for the range of speakers and the range of panelists. Yeah, thoroughly recommend it. I'm just going to check. I think it's battleofideas.org.uk is the website. People should check that out. Can I also do a little plug for my
Yes, go
book?
by all means. Yes.
So this is it's a letter on liberty, series of pamphlets produced by the Academy of Ideas, and mine's called Why Debating Matters. And basically the series was set up in lockdown, and it was because we felt like life was being locked down, but not just physical life, intellectual life as well. So we reignited this idea of pamphleteering. So these things are meant to be read, discussed, debated, passed on, become dog-eared. This is a new one, but you know, that's another thing where we just want the tradition of debating ideas and valuing freedom again. So yeah, Why Debate Matters. That's Letters on Liberty.
I actually, at the Birmingham Salon last month, debated on one of those pamphlets, which was in defence of teaching history, and I actually chaired it. And I have to say, I completely agree with you about the leaflets. This isn't a plug for Have or anything, but they're enlightening. And one of the things, especially with that subject, is yes, I'm a history fan, but I wouldn't call myself an expert. But actually doing that debate, it helps develop your skills in terms of history, and it makes you research various aspects of history as well. And I've got a few more, so I completely agree with you. I do fully recommend if people have the opportunity of purchasing one, that they not just one but several as well, they should do so. Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Mo, about free speech and debate and protest. In regards to Debating Matters, where can people go to find more information on that?
They can go to debatingmatters.com. That's our website, and they can find out all about that. Or you can follow us on Twitter at Debating Matters. Very simple. And I'm trying to tweet sort of two or three times a day now, and really get the word out of what we do at Debating Matters. Partly because I think it's so important, but partly because it's our 20th anniversary. So Debating Matters has been going for 20 years this year. Yeah. So we've got a whole range of exciting stuff happening in 2023. We've got 20 events. Our program's called 20 for 20. So 20 big events to celebrate our 20th anniversary. So yeah, give us a follow on Twitter or check out the website, debatingmatters.com, and have a look at what we do.
Cool, great stuff. I will leave the Twitter page for Debating Matters in the description below, as well as a link to the website as well. Mo, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about this. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
You too, Chris, and thanks for inviting me.
Okay, you're welcome. You take care.